Hi everyone. I'll give people a couple of minutes just to join.
Hey Jay.
Hello. And Natasha. We've got a few people. We've got a fair chunk to get through, so I might just crack on and see how we go. So firstly, thank you very much for joining today for the first of our digital skills learning agenda. And we're focusing on how to be data-driven and what data-driven means. The kind of format of this, I've got slides that go through, but there's also hopefully going to be a fair amount of interactivity. And we'll be asking kind of questions of you guys and seeing what you think. It's a safe space, so please feel free to ask questions as we go. Well, yeah, I suppose we've got a whole range of people on the call, like from our comms planning team to digital specialists from MediaCom, plus also I believe we've got some Tesco Bank people and Tesco Mobile people too, so that's great. There might also be some F&F and stores people on the call as well, so welcome everybody. For those that I haven't met, I'm Joe Capaldo. I'm the digital director at MediaCom, looking after digital for all things Tesco, or all things digital for all things Tesco. So yeah, welcome. Hi, thanks for joining. Today we're going to be talking about data-driven planning and strategy, and our first kind of bulk of the learning agenda is focused on this. We have put together 18 different kind of modules, although that sounds pretty formal, but trying to take you all the way from using data to inform planning and strategy, which we're going to cover today, and working that data story all the way through to activating campaigns, to generating insights to really re-inform that data-driven planning and strategy. A bit of my background, so I've been working in media for, I think, like 8 or 9 years. I can't really remember, I should have checked my LinkedIn before. But across a number of agencies, and always been on the data side, so both digital activation, digital planning, and data kind of mining, I suppose, for different clients in lots of different agencies. Doesn't necessarily make me an expert at all on data, but the ambition is to really share what we're talking about at MediaCom and what we're talking about in the digital space. The reason we want to talk about data is because data is at the heart of everything we do. So data really fuels all our decisions. Oh, I've got a build there. Data fuels everything at the top on all those channels, and it really informs everything at the bottom there in all those channels. But as we all know, data comes into play within our clients and within Tesco's own business, informing the decisions made within the business, what products to push out, who to talk to. So data really is at the heart of everything we do, and every decision we make in the media space should be driven by data. So it follows when we're talking about advertising, we should really be talking about data-driven advertising. And that's data-driven advertising rather than saying digital, programmatic, or biddable, or addressable, anything like that. That can all be rolled into data-driven advertising. There's good reason for this. Data goes into all of these things. It links everything together. There are loads and loads of buzzwords in the ecosystem that we work in. And actually, if we just boil them all down to data-driven advertising, it really describes what we're doing and what we're trying to do and what we're all about. But today and over the course of the next 18 sessions, which have been kind of staggered so that we don't have both this and digital inspiration session on the same day, but we have committed to doing 18 sessions talking all about data-driven advertising, from planning to the role for platforms, targeting, activation, and insights. But why is data so important? And Joe, tell us some real life examples. Well, unfortunately, we've been living in a horrendous pandemic, and data has been at the heart of that pandemic. And we are all very familiar with working in day-to-day lives, but it was really interesting, or I found it very interesting to see how data really infused into our general, I suppose, conversations and how we interacted with our daily life. I think everybody over the last 18 months has become a virologist, an epidemiologist, a biologist, a scientist, a vaccine expert, everything. And like we were sitting through those presentations, those COVID governmental meetings, where slideshows were being shown with lots and lots of graphs, and it really showed that the population as a whole is not adverse to data and really can get behind it and understand it. And data can be actually presented in very clear ways and get reactions and reactions out of it, I suppose. And just to frame that, there's whereas the UK through COVID was generally considered quite reactive to data, Australia was seen as a complete leader in the space and someone who has basically won at COVID by keeping their cases consistently low. Obviously, this is a fairly oldish graph, but and our cases have fortunately come down quite a lot. But Australia, since October, consistently stayed low. While we were being reactive in this time and trying to use that data that we had at our fingertips to make decisions, we were constantly on the back foot and reacting to data, whereas Australia were proactively waiting for data. And they kept, well, both of those things kept happening throughout COVID, where data was constantly being referred to, constantly being updated, and constantly being gathered. However, and there is a point to all of this, as we see now, we are far ahead of the rest of the world in terms of vaccine doses, which is great, and we're absolutely smashing it. Whereas Australia, because they took this reactive stance to the data being shown, actually held off from vaccines to see what the data gave them, how effective vaccines were, and now are in a situation where there's a shortfall of vaccines. They didn't jump on it fast enough, and now they're struggling to administer them. So even though that they were doing a really good job reacting to, proactively waiting till the data came in rather than reacting, that's actually set them back. So there's a real balance. I'm bringing this back to advertising. There's a balance for us. It shouldn't just be reactive. It can also be very powerful when used proactively. But the two shouldn't just be completely separated. We should be constantly thinking about how we can react to the data that's coming into us, and thinking about how we can use that going forward. So it kind of, we're welcoming to us to sit on the fence, consider those data points, and really make some decisions based on the good data we have at our fingertips. Great. So that's my introduction into why data is so important and why I am so excited about data and going on this journey with all of you. But for the main meat of the presentation, as that was just a bit of an intro, we're going to be talking today about data-driven planning and strategy. So there's going to be a mixture of kind of formats for this. There's going to be some slides. You might have noticed I've also got a whiteboard behind me, and I intend to use it. That was not a Amazon purchase. That's just going to sit and adorn my space. So yeah, looking forward to using that and getting some stuff down on the board. We'll also be asking the crowd here some questions around what they think about data, how they're using it, and they're kind of casting that critical eye over it. What we are lucky and fortunate for is that we have so many tools and data points that we have at our fingertips, going from the left-hand side here, which is our owned and first-party data, which is Tesco's own data. It might be data from platforms that we own and the kind of delivery of our media. That's all our owned first-party data that we have access to. If anyone on this call doesn't have access to these parts of data, I'm sure we can all group together as a team and make sure that each person has access to all these data points that we're going to talk about. We've also got free to use data points. So that is your kind of Google Trends, or if you are in the SEO game, that might be the page speed insights that you can download as an extension. And there's also mapping data and free to use data on the internet that we often bring into presentations I suppose, and use to back up our points. Then we've got lots of things in MediaCom that we have access to. These are just a brief subsection, I suppose, of the tools that we have at our disposal. And we're not going to go through every single one of these tools and the pros and cons of them, but hopefully the ambition for today is to give you the tools to critically analyze the data that will be coming out of them, and giving you the tools and the opportunity to use a lot of those data sources all together to really build a great picture of an audience, the media that we're buying, or whatever it might be. And then the last kind of column is our media partner-based insights. So these are insights given by our media owners to us that are really useful and we can use in different ways, but also should be taken very much with a pinch of salt. And sort of that critical thinking that we want to get to is to start understanding, firstly, the pros but also more importantly, the cons of data. So at MediaCom, over the last 6 months, we've actually stopped our Comscore access, and we've kind of revoked that license and have gone with SimilarWeb instead. And Comscore was one of the key currencies, I suppose, of digital advertising, giving us lots and lots of data on how media platforms are being used and the audiences that are using them. But if you dig into Comscore a little bit more, that's only made up of data from about 60,000 computers in the UK, all of which are people that have agreed and signed up to, and I believe are paid by Comscore, so that Comscore can constantly kind of review what they're viewing online and their behaviors, and link that back to their probable demographic information. So even though that it's been such a digital currency for years and years, actually only 60,000 opt-ins isn't a great sample size. So it's one of those areas that we can really think about and ask, is this the best data? Is it truly representative of an incredibly diverse UK population? I'd possibly argue it isn't, but it can give us kind of fairly good insights and intel if used in the right environments. Captify, on the other hand, again, a very big media owner that we use a little on Tesco Mobile, and a lot of their business is based on the insights that they can generate for media companies and clients. But it's also worth noting on Captify that their data is collected mostly from price comparison sites, which they don't necessarily talk about, and it's a bit of a secret that I've managed to find out. They have integrations with the search bars in Money Supermarket, I believe, which then they can extrapolate into what they call kind of audience insights. So even though their data can look really nice, can be presented really nicely, can be really answer the brief, unless we know exactly where that data has come from, where it's sourced, can we really necessarily trust it and base all of our marketing decisions on it? Not throwing Captify under the bus here, I could throw a number of people under the bus, but it's just one to really think about. And unless we as a kind of media team, both on the Tesco side and on the MediaCom side, unless we start to understand where that data is being captured from and by, then we can't really judge the validity of it. There's also, with media partner-based insights and I suppose, data. There's that you have to understand. There's a reason they are giving you that data. There's an incentive for them to supply us lots of data, to supply us those flashy insights, because we're going to then end up spending with them. and we've got to make sure that, okay, we've got that critical eye, we understand they're doing it and they're incentivized to do it. Does that actually add to the quality of data, or maybe put a question mark next to it? Very unlikely that you're going to brief out a media owner and then not come back with any data. They're always going to find something that correlates with the brief being given. So that's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about. But I'd like us in a second to get off mute and start pitching in, because I'd like to talk about how we use data and strategy and the questions that we're asking of our data sources. And I've broken this down into 3 areas, but we can probably talk a little bit around whether these are the right areas. So we have, I can see 3 things. So data for investigation, and this is data that you don't know anything about a topic. It might be how fast off the top of my head, a lorry moves uphill when carrying 16 tons. None of the people on this call might know anything about it and might go out searching for the data that comes back from it. So the reason I brought this up is data for that sort of investigation can be quite dangerous. We're not going necessarily with a hunch. We don't really know if we find that information, whether it's going to be good or bad. And therefore, it's kind of a bit of a shot in the dark. It's also likely that we're only going to find maybe 1 or 2 sources of data, and we can't really validate those against each other. So I'd say data for investigation and investigating in that way can be pretty dangerous. Data for verification can also be quite dangerous. So this is when you've got a hunch about something and you go and find data that backs it up. This might be, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but Roshni's like to buy the latest iPhone product. Actually, no, I know that the better example would be Roshni's always buy the latest iPhones. So therefore, I'm going to go and find out data that backs that up and verifies what I think. Those are both quite dangerous elements and something that we shouldn't hopefully engage with too much, or at least might be at the very start of our data planning and strategy journey that we can then build on afterwards. Data for hypotheses is the area that we want to get into more. This is when we come up with a statement and find data that both really ideally supports and doesn't support our hypotheses. So we're starting to try and think about that scientific use of data and trying to use data for science rather than data to back up our assumptions. So I don't necessarily want to pick on people, but I want to ask the crowd here to call out some of their hypotheses that they're currently thinking about. It might be of briefs at the moment, it might be of different, I suppose, topics or anything currently in their real lives, to then create investigative questions or verification questions, actually try and mold those into hypotheses. Does anyone want to speak out? It's always a touch awkward on Teams. No. All right, I'm going to pick on people then. Lauren, just as you are the first person, Lauren McGowan, on my screen, what hypotheses are you working on at the moment, or what sort of questions are you asking data at the moment?
Thanks, Josh.
You on the spot. Yeah, drama.
Got the whole planning team laughing at me around me in the office. She picked on me. So one brief that Jess and I are working on is Project Kansas, which I think the bank guys will probably be quite familiar with. So the whole proposition is around trying to encourage people to save and show them the different ways they can save. So I think at the minute, the hypothesis is that the WICs struggle to save and that we need to try and help them. So maybe something around that.
Okay, like it. Cool. So then if we take that forward, and I think that's a great hypothesis. So the WICs struggle to save, and we can go back to the data sources we have here. There's a number of loads and loads of data points that we can pull in on that. So we could look at our own first party data and see whether within Tesco that WICs audiences actually overspend maybe and overbuy on their shops. It might be difficult to classify though. We could also use some of those free to use tools and see how often a Wix style audience or that demographic actually search for money saving tips. But then we got a bit of a clash there. It could be that Wix are searching for money saving tips because they know how to save money and they're getting extra tips, or it might be that they are searching because they are struggling. Then you obviously will know, Lauren, that there is things like Telmar that might also help. And then we could reach out to media partners as well. I suppose the point here is that it's quite a broad hypothesis and you might want to break it down into a couple of different ways. I'd suggest maybe the Wix struggle to save on food might be a better one and more direct, and then that's something we can really dig into. Or alternatively, we could look outside of what we think about groceries and think about what sort of data points and where we could find data that says the Wix struggle to save in daily life. Maybe it's maybe they're on money comparison sites, and therefore Captify actually might be a really great option for us to pull data from, knowing in the background that they know about Money Saving Expert and moneysupermarket.com. Alternatively, I'm trying to think, we could also look at our delivery in display and see what kind of sites our Wix audience that we previously targeted have been consistently on. That might give us an idea of how often they're going on kind of money saving tip pages, or whether they're interacting with kind of money saving or non-aspirational sites. So I think there's loads and loads of ways we can cut that down, but I'd say that hypotheses might need to be broken down into a number of hypotheses so that you can find the different data points to either prove or disprove. And as such, I think in science, at least for hypotheses, we often, scientists often try and find out the thing that disproves it. So it might be that we look to try and find those data points for Wix that show they're actually really aspirational or overspending, and then that might give us as much data to play with than just trying to find those verification data points. So that's what we're trying to think about with hypotheses. I'm going to pick on somebody else as well. I'm going to get the list up. Maybe someone from a Tesco point of view. Anybody from the mobile team?
So we are, it is on Tesco. So there's a hypothesis around whether what platform drives trade the best.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, and that's obviously going across multi-channels. So it's not necessarily just a kind of online hypothesis, that's kind of extending to offline as well. So it might be like news brand websites versus platforms with daily engagement versus longer term media channels like monthly magazines, for example. So there's a hypothesis that trade is driven better by platforms and media channels with more immediacy and more kind of frequency involved with them.
Cool. Love it. That's a really good one. And yeah, that's a good hypothesis. And we've got loads of data points, hopefully, to back that up. You'd look at, things that we haven't called out here, but econometrics, but you could further break that down and again, go for the null hypotheses and try and find data points around that. Is there something that starts to say that those platforms that aren't immediate actually drive trade as well? Having that kind of balanced and rounded view might actually help to drive that initial kind of verification point. So yeah, definitely one we can play around with. Like it though. Cool. I'm going to move on because I've only got 20 minutes left. I think I've waffled in the fun section far too much. That's fine. So what I've put together is a one-pager with lots and lots of questions that I'd love everybody to start using when they are presented with data or searching for data. The real who's, what's, where, when, why, and how's of data. So the fact is, not, as we were talking about earlier, not all data is created equally or curated equally. And I think it's really important to start diving into each data provider that we use each data tool that we use, and really understand all these different facets of those data items and those tools. So that will be allowing us to start judging who's collecting this data and who's involved in the data, how many people are included in the data set. And if you could fill out this whole sheet for any one of those data providers that we showed earlier on, that could give you a real sense of, is this or is this not a good tool to use, and when we should use it. So I'll send around that whole list afterwards. But when you are presented with a brand new data source you haven't used before, or even a trusted data source that you've been using constantly, but actually might maybe blindly and don't know what's under the hood, a whole list of questions like this is absolutely key. So I'll be sharing that around afterwards. Nice. We're going to nip into, and we touched on it earlier, nip into the different types of data that we have in our fingertips. This isn't data necessarily that we can target or use. This data for insights, for planning and strategy. And so I want, in the chat bar or call out, does anyone have a definition of what we classify as first-party data? All right. Everyone's being a bit shy.
I'll have a crack, Joe.
Go on.
I'll have a crack, Joe. So first party, I mean, this is not going to be very eloquent, but to me, it's first party means it's the data of the advertiser.
Nice.
I guess if we're in the context of planning on an advertiser's campaign, so it comes from the brand themselves. I know that's not the be all and end all, but that's how I simply look at it.
Yeah, like it. I think that's right, and I'd even go broader, and it's data we own that nobody else can access. So you're absolutely right. So that's our brand's data. It's data we have in our platforms that nobody else can access. It's all of that sort of thing. Absolutely. Pete, do you want to have a go while you're here on second-party data? Oh no, I've accidentally clicked too far. There we go. Did you see that?
You know, I actually didn't, so you're lucky. I actually asked your predecessor this, Joe, because I think everyone sort of gets first and third, but like the second doesn't really get talked about a lot.
Yeah.
So, second party. So I guess if you think of Tesco stores, they have a lot of, I guess, brands they stock in their store. Let's just say a Unilever brand, for example. And I think it's where Tesco stores might use a Unilever brand's data for whatever product line.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mutually beneficial for them to both use that data because they're both going to benefit from, I guess, that campaign or from that sale. Again, I know it's a bit broader than that. That's my understanding.
Does anybody have any advances on Pete's valiant attempt? No? All right, well, we'll jump in. So it's, yeah, I think you are right, Pete. Data we can access, and the we really should be boldened here. So again, it's not data that can be accessed by anybody, but it's data that we alone can access. So things that I would put in second-party data can be, yeah, some of our partner data, as you were referring to. So it might be Unilever sales that they share with Tesco. But it also can be from a tools and the insight strategy perspective. Things like Telmar could be considered second-party data. This is data that we have access to that not everybody on the street could have access to. We're paying a subscription for Telmar. And on the back end of Telmar, we're getting things like the Tesco 5 families in there, which nobody else will have access to. So it's, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's that shared data, but sitting on, well, that is mostly relevant to us, I suppose. And you're right. Anybody got any advances on third-party data? No? All right, I'm going to go for it. So it's data anyone can access. And this is especially from the planning point of view. So a third-party data tool might be something like Google Trends. This is free for anybody to use. It's not necessarily exclusive. Well, it's not exclusive to us at Mediacom or Tesco. And realistically, you can get the same insights out as the guy next door. So that's how we kind of are classifying first, second, and third-party data use. I'm gonna attempt to, yeah.
When you say anyone, do you mean any agency or marketing professional, or you mean like anyone, like any person?
So I
Because obviously,
would,
like my mum and dad could go into Google Trends, couldn't they? Who don't
Yeah.
work in the industry.
but I then suppose your mum and dad could go and buy Blue Kai audience segment if they wanted to. It wouldn't take them, well, it would take them a while probably to work it out, but it would be freely available to them as it is
Yeah.
freely available to us and Tesco.
Okay, so anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, really anybody. And what I wanted to do now was jump out of PowerPoint mode and hit the whiteboard. And the reason is I want to start just talking about these different data points and have a little think about why they are what they are and why we use them. So this is going to be an experiment, not something I've done before, but we're going to go for it. And please speak out if you can't see at all. Does it stop presenting yet? No,
Not
there it
yet.
is, presenting. Gotcha. Okay, if people could turn off cameras, that would be amazing, so that I can go full screen. Superb stuff. All right, so we've got first, this is so exciting. This has basically been what I've been waiting for. Second and third party. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So can we have some pros and cons of first party data called out from the crowd? Everybody see that? Hopefully there's not too much glare. I'm going to pick on people. Lizzie, Turl, first party data. What are some pros of first party data?
Hello.
Hello.
Queries on first-party data, GDPR compliance.
Yeah,
So, are we okay to even have that data or use it?
love it. Any other pros of first party data? I'm going to pick on Daisy. Go
I was ready and raring to go. That it is. Oh, sorry, I won't turn my camera on. That only you have access to it, so it gives you unique access to certain people.
on. Love it. Yeah. There's two good pros. Anybody got any cons for first party data?
It can be like just customers, therefore you don't have a view or picture of non-customers, especially trying to grow penetration.
Cool, limited to customers. Love it. Any other cons?
We don't have that much scale.
Love it. Low scale. For ease, we will nip to, I think that'll do for first party. We're going to nip to third party data. What pros are there in third party data that we can see?
I guess on the flip side of first party, we do have that scale.
Yeah. Love it. Any other pros? No?
That's
Right. What about cons?
a pro is. I have a pro for you, Joe. If you want a pro.
Oh, go on, yeah.
I guess you have more targeting opportunities. So first party data, we only really know what they're doing in relation to tests to go, where there's more opportunities, I guess, with third party data.
Love it. Any cons?
It's not as specific.
Yeah. Anything else?
Suppose the GDPR elements that you have to face.
Absolutely. So unverified, we'll call it.
And I guess also, Joe, I think that's what Jamie was talking. I think he might mean this. It's like, I guess it's inferred, isn't it? It's not actual sometimes.
Yeah.
So it might not actually be Tesco Club Card people. It's how that third party, I guess, defines them.
Love it. Perfect. So we've got that, and then on the flip side, all of those things. And then second party data, we don't have to go through the same kind of process, but you can see that there's a scale here between the two. Second party data actually sits between them, so it has a little bit more scale than our first party data. The access isn't as I suppose, unique to us. It's not necessarily limited to customers, but it does have some customer data in it. But it's not got a total opportunity, and the scale is somewhere between the two as well. And that's not just scale of the amount of data, but also scale of how we can use that data as well. Nicely done. All right. Any questions on that while I jump into the slides again? I'll take a picture of that and include it in the deck. Thought you all smashed it. All right. Fine. Very conscious of time. That was you. That is a nifty feature. Great. What we're going to then talk around is the three pillars that we use in planning and strategy, and where we use those data sources. So first pillar is audience, second pillar is media, and third pillar is device. So within audience, there are lots and lots of hypotheses, and we were touching on some earlier that we can start to formulate and really think about what we know about the audience and understand a little bit more about them. So there's a baby crying outside, ideally. And I've listed down 5 of those kind of audience, I suppose, qualities that we can form hypotheses around. So next time we're working on a brief, and this is both on Tesco and Mediacom's side, start forming hypotheses around each of these things, and you'll begin to get a great sense of what that audience looks like. Again, going back to an earlier slide, it's dangerous to just go down one route. Actually having that collective thinking and that rounded opinion allows you to make better informed decisions, or maybe even find gaps that you might not have thought of before. So we won't do this as a project now, but next time you get a brief, work through all of those 5 areas and make hypotheses, at least one on each, and that will bring you a really rounded audience experience. And the same thing can happen with media. So we shouldn't just assume that all media is right for every plan, and we definitely don't. But if we, in the planning and strategy phase, start to think about the consumption, the behaviors and the need states of each media channel and make some hypotheses around that, again, not just the audience will be well-rounded, but also our media recommendation and suggestion will be well-rounded as well. And then going further, not just on media, but we go down to device level, something we don't necessarily talk about too much, but is a real pillar in how people are interacting with advertising and with media in general. What are those hypotheses around how people are using their devices, the ownership of those devices, and the need states of those devices? So lots of things there. There are 11 in total. Next time you get a brief, get them down on paper, get your hypotheses on paper, and then start critically using those first, second, and third party tools that we spoke about to really form that well-rounded picture. Nice. I'm not going to go through what we've covered because we definitely don't have time for that. And it's a good learning point for me, make it shorter. We're going to jump into, this was one of the key topics of what the DMP is and how it works. This is a really brief overview. There's loads more info that I can provide on the DMP, and please send over any questions that you have. But I'm going to take you through today what the DMP is and what's in the DMP. Then we're going to have a little think about what questions we can ask the DMP and how we should ask them, and then what that can inform for our media planning. The DMP has been spoken about for, well, since it was introduced for Tesco a year and a bit ago, nearly 2 years ago, I think now. And there's loads and loads of info in there that we can use. Obviously, it's mostly stores data that's in there, but we're slowly, hopefully, ingesting some mobile data in soon, and some, just getting messages at the same time, and bits and bobs of bank data, but we're still working on those areas. Firstly, in the DMP, there are 2 main points of entry from a Tesco point of view. That is club card data, so data registered and linked to a club card. And I've separated this out, but purchase data as well. So that's all kind of till transactions that aren't necessarily linked to a club card. Someone might not have used their club card, but are still all stored within Tesco and Tesco's audience platform, otherwise known as TAP. dunnhumby feeds in here. That's dunnhumby, the DH at the top, and helps to categorize those data and helps sort it out. So that turns a few club card people into Roshnis that then contextualizes it for us. That was all fed into the Amobi DMP alongside website data. So that is site traffic, what people are doing on site, what sort of pages they are interacting with. And that's not just on a grocery or a mobile or bank point of view, but also from a real food online point of view, which can give us that more rounded experience and knowledge of the audience. Amobi DMP then turns it into an ID or a cookie, or they call it an Amobi ID, and starts piecing all those things together. So there is always going to be a bit of data loss and some areas that we can't kind of sync together. We can't sync purchase data to club card data because club card's not being used, but we can sync some purchase data, some club card data to website data, or we can sync some purchase data to website data. So it really depends how those data matches are happening and how much data is coming into Amobi DMP. But typically we're seeing, I think it really depends on the data source, but of the 100% that comes into Amobi, maybe only 60% is actually turned into an Amobi ID. It might even be slightly less than that. I don't know, Stu, if you know exactly what percentage that is, but I'm assuming it's like that. Then when we turn it into a cookie ID, or Amobi does, then we can push it through to one of our DSPs, either Amobi or DV360. Then that ID, that cookie we kind of search for it on the web, impressions are coming in, and we're trying to work out, okay, I can see that cookie there, let's go and bid on it. And that's how that whole flow works. There is that, as I said, that decline in volume as we go through to delivery on the web. But yeah, as a very simple flow, this is what's happening. And when we make an insight request, so we ask a question of Tesco data, we put that into the Amobi DMP and can ask, for example, how many Roshni bought carrots in the last week and find that out. It's quite complicated and it's definitely not necessarily 100% easy to navigate. But what I quite like to do is think of it and the data that Tesco has specifically as what can be seen on a receipt. So Tesco can't see everything about a person at all. It's only one small part of them, and it's their interaction with Tesco. And looking at that TAP data, it's very much what's on the receipt and what's being bought. So this is my receipt yesterday from Tesco, in my local Tesco down in Bournemouth. Obviously, just a standard buy for me. But what we can start to do is pull out some insights and infer some insights from that receipt that can inform our planning. But obviously these are inferences and don't necessarily describe that whole audience. Rather than doing this as a project, because I know we're over time, I'll just call out some of those insights that can be questioned and asked of the TAP data and the DMP data that we can then pull out and use in our planning. One of them might be that I went to the Bournemouth Kinson. One of them might be that I bought these items, and if we were able to match them to other purchases through Club Card, then you could start to understand if this is a trend of mine, if I only buy gin on a Thursday, or if I buy, Wednesday, or if I buy it every single day. There is a piece here that I didn't have my Club Card on me, so didn't use my Club Card. So again, this wouldn't sit in Club Card and be targetable data. It would sit in that purchase data. But very useful to know that maybe people like this who buy this kind of these sort of items don't have Club Cards, and maybe that's something that we can use. And then the last thing on the receipt is the time and date. Obviously, that can be important and useful as well. Understanding when people are going to the shops, when people are doing their purchases, is that a pattern as well? So again, next time we're thinking about questions to ask the DMP, think back to what is on your most recent receipt and the sort of inferences that will come out the back of that. Great. And I pretty much ran out of time, but we've covered quite a lot today. So asking questions of data, qualities of data, hypotheses, how the DMP works. We're going to, in a later session, go into more detail on what's in the DMP and how that works. And then trying to start thinking critically. I'll share that form of data and how to kind of judge data. I'll share also all those data inputs, and if anyone doesn't have access to them, then we'll do our best to try and get that access sorted for you. And then next time you have that brief or that plan you're working on, start to form those hypotheses. It will really start to enrich and that will create a well-rounded view of the audience. But we've flown through that. Thank you very much for engaging. Next time, we are going to be talking about how we scrutinize previous activity and bring insights forward. And that will be mining into platforms and reading results. So quite data heavy and more data usage, hopefully more whiteboard usage as well next time. But yeah, we've recorded the session. I'll be sharing the deck. I'll be sharing some notes as well. Thank you so much for joining.
Amazing.
Happy
Thanks,
to hang on for a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Joe. Really good session. Really good.